Coming up on ReFramed. Along with us today is our special guest, Tracey Vieira, and today we'll be discussing the TV show called Hawkeye.
I don't know that there's many people doing representation really well.
You know, that's the kind of representation that I think I really enjoy.
I think, again, you've got a fabulous answer.
And so much about knowing what you can be is being able to see it.
Welcome back to ReFramed, the podcast that reframes how disability is portrayed in film and TV. I'm Jason Climo, and I'm your host for today, and my co-host today is the lovely Stephanie Dower. Along with us today is our special guest, Tracey Vieira, and today we'll be discussing the TV show called Hawkeye, which is a Disney Plus series. But before I get too stuck into that one, let's just say hello to Tracey and get stuck into learning a bit more about her. So thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to have you. I feel like perhaps we could say you're a bit like an industry insider for us. A lot of the time we have people with disability join us, and I understand you're a non-disabled person who works in the industry. So we're very excited to hear your perspectives, especially on Hawkeye, but just on the industry as a whole. So thank you. Enough from me. I guess, did you want to, set the scene for everybody at home and let them know about yourself?
Sure. So, hi everybody at home, and hi you guys. So, Tracy Vieira. I am the Chief Content Officer at a company called Hoodlum. We make film and television shows. So, the last year, I can't believe I'm saying last year. Last year, I did 2 feature films. So, one for Netflix and one for Stan. One was a Christmas movie for Stan, and my Netflix film will come out later this year. We're in the last week of post production. We also make a show called 5 Bedrooms, which is on Paramount Plus. We did a show called Harrow for 3 seasons on the ABC here, and it was international on Hulu. And I don't know, we do a lot. We also did a show called All My Friends Are Racist for ABC this year, which is a fantastic, very raw, queer, Indigenous series, and we're very proud to have been part of that. And then just as background, before that, I was with Screen Queensland for 5.5 years as the CEO, which is a state-based funding agency. And prior to that, I spent 10 years in Los Angeles working for a company called Ozfilm. And essentially, my job was to help facilitate international production into Australia. So I did all the big deals on things like Thor, Ragnarok, and Aquaman. Lots and lots of things, about $2 billion worth of production. So I've been in the industry for over 20 years. And then when I'm not doing my Hoodlum job, I'm also the chair of, or the president, I love that title, of the Screen Producers Australia, which is the organisation that represents producers in Australia. And I'm the chair of Griffith Film School's advisory board and the chair of the Asia Pacific Screen Awards. So I like to be busy.
Yeah, apparently. That's amazing.
I think the industry in Brisbane knows how busy Tracey is. She is very impressive. I know you and I met when you were in your role as CEO at Screen Queensland, which you were very missed there. I miss going into the office and not seeing you there. But you were in that role for 5.5 years. We've talked on this podcast about the push and the progression we've made around diversity and that kind of thing. From your perspective, what kind of progress has been made in the last, 5, even 10 years?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I feel like there has definitely been an acceleration, and I wouldn't say it's been 10 years. I would say it's been 5 years, which started really in this country around gender representation on screen. And like the rest of the world, that sort of came off the back of the Sony hack and the Me Too movement out of the US, and caused other places like Australia to have a hard look at itself. That, in terms of gender diversity, or I should say, even before that, it was really about female representation in the industry. And so that's really only been about 5 years. And that quickly changed to being more inclusive around Indigenous representation. And I think it's really only the last 2 years that I'm starting to see that expand into other areas. And but what I will say is that it is evolving, and I think for a lot of the industry, there's a lot of learning to continue to do. I don't know that there's many people doing representation really well, but I certainly think that, you know, there's a lot more commitment to doing better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. We have definitely got a long way to go, but it's very interesting to hear, I guess, that,
Yeah.
a little bit of like a snapshot of, I guess, a very rough snapshot of like a history of
Yeah.
where we've come from and where we're going now is, and there's so much work to be done. And also, like, you know, touching on the fact that it doesn't just happen overnight. Like, you can't just be inclusive straight away. There's a lot of work that obviously goes into it. So I think it is really important to talk
That's
about that
right.
as well. Yeah.
And I think also it's really easy to, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, it's really easy to think that you've done it when you see people on screen. And I think that that just doesn't go far enough either. And for me, in terms of the organizations I'm involved in and what we're doing, it's really about changing it from leadership down. Because I really think that, you know, it's fine to now have better representation on some of our shows, you know, and on screen, but we're still not doing it very well behind camera. We're not doing it really well in terms of who are working in the agencies. We're not doing it really well in terms of who's on boards. We're not doing it well at all in terms of who's commissioning content. So I think that, you know, when I say, you know, we've come a long way in 5 years, I still think we're at the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
This is it's no one has an easy way of responding to this, but what are some things that do need to change? Like, where does that change need to come from? Is it from the people seeking to enter the industry, or is it from the inside out? Like, where is that change, or where should that change be coming from, in your opinion?
Yeah, and I've actually probably really have a good answer on this, and that it has to start at the top. I really do feel, from a leadership perspective, that, and probably the best way to answer this is actually to talk about inclusion in elections, where once upon a time we only had white men who were able to vote, and we needed those white men to vote to allow women to be able to vote. And originally that was just white women who then got the vote. We then needed white women and white men to enable and make that change for Indigenous Australians to be able to vote. So like those things sometimes happen very far apart. So it's the gatekeepers, it's the people at the top who actually have to make the shift. And, you know, I think about, I've only recently become the president of Screen Producers Australia. And one of the things for me in terms of going onto that board was looking at representation on that board and really saying, look, we don't have enough diversity here, and what can we do about it? And the way that we were able to, well, we're starting to address that is we announced an initiative that the board would mentor people in terms of from diverse backgrounds who are producers, so that we can actually open the doors, show them how the board works, give them access into the meetings. I think demystify the process of what the board does, so that people actually feel enabled to stick their hand up for those roles and actually, you know, hold their hand into that leadership, so that next time there's an election, we have started to make that change. And and you have to do that from the top. So I think that that's absolutely critical. And I want to see that in agencies. Like, we still don't have anybody running a screen agency in this country from any kind of diverse background, or who, you know, has physical a physical disability. Like, we just don't have that. So that has to happen because people at the top open those doors.
Yeah. Okay, you proved me wrong. There is a good answer to that.
Literally. And also, I'm just like loving you and so glad that we have you on. So thank you again for coming on. I think probably the final question
Thank you for
before
inviting
we
me.
no, you're so welcome. The final question before we jump over to talking about Hawkeye is probably, again, like, I think you'll have an amazing answer for, and we sort of discussed it a little bit prior to recording is why you think representation is so important. And I guess, with your specific lens as well, talking about why it's so important for people with disability or people from diverse backgrounds to, I guess, be at the writing table and control their own narrative as well.
Yeah, 100%. So I think, again, it started for me personally, as and I can go right back to early in my high school years where I wanted to be in film and television. I didn't know a single person in film and television. I didn't know a way into the industry. I didn't know, where you started. I didn't know anything about it, what you did. And so much about knowing what you can be is being able to see it. And so it's much easier to know how to get into an industry if you've got other people around you who are in that industry who can talk about access, can give you a hand up, whatever those things are. And I think it's so important, when I had my son, who's now 10 years old, and I would sit down with him and I'd watch shows, and it really become very present for me in watching children's television, that even with animated characters that don't have genders, that they were all male voiced. And, shows like Paw Patrol, I love dogs, but all the dogs for a long time were male dogs. Or the Minions, they were all little male minions. Or Madagascar, in terms of the voices of the animals. And I started to really have this awareness. And so for me, that's where it started. That's where I got really interested. And then for me personally in my life, you're right, I don't have a physical disability. I'm a straight, white, privileged female, but I do have family and I do have friends that have not seen themselves on screen, that aren't represented in stories, and who don't have, as I said, I didn't know my way into the industry, but they really have a lot. They're starting much further back in trying to get where they want to be. And so I realized that, first of all, we have to be able to see it to know that we can do those things. And then it's one thing again on the screen, but then it's who has the right to tell those stories. And I think that, it's so critical to getting those things right, because it's really easy to think that you're doing the right thing and put a character on, and it may be, for example, a trans character. But if you're a white, straight man writing that character, you don't understand all the dimensions and all of the things about that person, actually be able to bring them to the screen to be more than someone who is trans, in terms of having, a complete, they're more than that.
Yeah.
And that authenticity and how that's brought to screen is so important to have inclusion. And that's not through consultation. It's actually through actually having people who actually have that lived experience, being able to bring voices to those stories and tell those stories and work behind the scenes on those stories and be in the stories.
Have control and power, I guess, over the whole process, and the story is the main thing.
Absolutely.
I think, again, you've got a fabulous answer.
Well, I think it's just, I have been in the industry I've been in it a long time. And I think for me, I've always come at it from the perspective that I've got a lot to learn, and I'm always very keen to learn more and to listen and understand where we do things wrong. And I think through doing that and seeing where things have gone wrong and seeing the damage that can do to a community, or, to the kid at home watching a character. I know we're going to talk about Hawkeye. If you're a deaf child at home and the representation on screen is so wrong that it's not their lived experience, of course they're going to know that. And then you do more damage than you do good. So we've got to get it right.
And on that, let's head over and start discussing Hawkeye. Steph, can you just give us a bit of a synopsis?
So Hawkeye is a Disney Plus series based on the character of Hawkeye, who we're all familiar with from the Avengers films. But in this adventure, Hawkeye, whose name is actually Clint Barton, has a seemingly simple mission to get back to his family for Christmas. But when a presence or two from his past threatens to derail far more than his festive spirit, Clint must team up and accept the help from Kate Bishop, a 22-year-old archer who was growing up idolizing Hawkeye. But the real reason that we're talking about Hawkeye on ReFramed today is the character of Maya Lopez, who's actually the antagonist of the film, or one of the antagonists. She's also known as Echo, who I believe we're going to be seeing more of in future series. So Echo is actually a character who is deaf and has a prosthetic leg, as does the actor portraying her, Alakua Cox. I hope I'm saying her name right. Tracy, what were your initial thoughts of Hawkeye?
Well, this is so funny. So when I was thinking about what show to do, and Jason very kindly sent me a list of shows, and Hawkeye was on there, and it was the only one I'd watched, and I know, and that I'd seen. And so I went home, and I was saying to my son, "Oh, I'm going to do this podcast. It's on Hawkeye," and I said, "But it's about representation of people with disability, and I don't remember anyone with a disability in it." And he was like, "Oh, Mum." And I was like, I have to watch it again. And so it was so interesting to me that it just hadn't registered. I just really enjoyed it as a series. And then coming back to it and looking at it through the lens, beyond story, I actually thought it was interesting because it's not just Maya, the character, either, who is deaf, but the character Hawkeye in this, he is not deaf, but he has loss of hearing, and so he's wearing a hearing aid. So there is that as well, which I thought was really interesting because, and I know that if you're a huge comic book fan or a Marvel fan, that there's history to that story and how that all happens, and there's references to that in other parts of the Marvel storytelling. But I thought it was interesting because you've got these two characters coming together and they both have interactions that relate to that. But more important to me, that's not all their story is. And I thought in terms of having characters that are really well-rounded, I love the fact that Maya, particularly, the most interesting thing about her isn't that she's deaf, and that's why I didn't remember.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of representation that I think I really enjoy, is when you have to really think about it. You're not thinking at it, oh yeah, that's a disabled character. You're just like, that's a cool character. She's part of the story. It's she's not serving a disability purpose, which is exactly what we're on about on ReFramed. I again also love that, as you mentioned, Clint Hawkeye himself is hard of hearing or has hearing loss. And so not only do you get that deaf and that hard of hearing representation, you get a scope of it, you get a spectrum of it. It's not just one person's experience. You get a much more accurate, portrayal of different experiences of it. So I think that was really, really smart and really well done.
Yeah, I agree. And that was probably one of my favorite scenes where they were in it together, very early on. And she sort of is trying to communicate with him, and he doesn't read sign language because he never learnt sign language. His hearing loss is much later in life. And so how that plays out and her frustration with him around needing to lean on this sort of new technology, I thought that was such a great interaction in terms of actually going, not everybody who has a hearing disability is the same, and they have different issues with it. And I really enjoyed that scene in terms of how that played out. And yeah, I thought that was a really great moment.
I loved, and I agree. Yeah, no, I fully agree with everything that you're both saying. I loved it. It is definitely for me. Mostly it was incidental representation, and I love that. And Hawkeye is like very well loved in the Marvel universe. And I think the way in which they have actually tackled disability, provided those different experiences as well. They've got sensory disability in there. They've got physical disability in there. We have an antagonist, kind of like anti-hero character, because we all loved Echo, didn't we? Like, just what a badass. And we have both hero and anti-hero as a person with disability in the one series, and I just went, this is the future of TV. Like, this is what I want to see more of, and it just bloody excites me. Then when you, like, we've already talked about Eternals as well. The is it the most recent? No, I think Spider-Man's the most recent, possibly, but one of the most recent Marvel films to come out. And there's also disability representation in that. And so it very much excites me that this is the kind of path that they're taking. And I really want to encourage them to continue taking that path. And also taking a note out of Eternals and Hawkeye's book, I guess, in that they have tackled it in this really great incidental way. And whether they've had someone behind the scenes, which I don't know. I'm looking at you, Steph. You're usually the one that looks behind the scenes to see if there's someone with disability involved.
I actually did do a little bit of background research, and a really interesting thing was Marvel hired deaf consultants and interpreters who actually made up new language in ASL to cover terms and references from the MCU that otherwise didn't have sign language already developed for it. So I thought that was, they're making up their own language now.
Yeah, that is cool. That's very James Cameron, who made up the whole language in Avatar as well, isn't it? Like, yeah.
Literally.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, literally. The other thing that I saw an interview, and where the woman who plays, and I don't want to get her name wrong either, who plays Maya, both Jeremy Renner and Haley Steinfeld actually made an effort to learn some American Sign Language so that they could communicate, and at least be able to say their names when they met, to try and make her feel comfortable as a new actor coming in. And one of the things I do want to do is give a shout out to Marvel, because she is I believe, a first-time actor, and is also Native American, which is the same as the representation in the comic books. And I can't imagine that when they started that, whether they even thought they could find an authentic actor to do this on screen. And not only have they done it, she's absolutely stellar, and I think is so believable as the character, in every way, and does deserve to have her own show. So
it was also interesting because at the beginning of the series, you see a young Maya who's sign language, speaking in sign language with her father, and the young girl who plays young Maya is actually the actor's cousin in real life. So there is a family. Not only are we getting more authentic representation for Native Americans, but the young woman, has that experience with ASL. I don't think she spoke it fluently before the series, but she made an effort, obviously, to learn it for the series, and got to play her cousin's younger self, which is another little weird and exciting behind the scenes tidbit.
yeah, that's awesome. I love that. But I also think it just goes to show that the effort that can be made in terms of, and when I think about inclusivity, it is about making people actually feel that they should be there because they should be there. And when everybody else actually steps up, and doesn't expect everybody to be speaking the same language, have the same abilities as they do, and you actually reach out and actually make yourself a community. It's such a I think amazing experience and transformative, and that I think comes through in terms of story on screen. So understanding that was something that happened behind the scenes actually makes me enjoy it even more when I go back and watch it.
That's it. We can look beyond the usual avenues of casting and things like that. And when we do open ourselves up, I mean, I've said it before, we work in the creative industries. When we get creative with our processes like that, look what happens, something amazing. So yeah.
Definitely, and it translates and it works. Like,
yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, if you had written down the list of everything you needed for that character, I can imagine a lot of casting directors would have said, "We'll never find this." But the truth is that absolutely, pretty much anything you want to cast in terms of character probably is out there, and it just takes a bit more work to figure it out. And to get this right is so important that it's worth doing that piece of work. And I think going back to, sorry, Stephanie, what you were saying too about having consultants in terms of that work, I think the interesting thing for me around that is, does that mean that we need to do more work in terms of deaf writers as well, and being able to give access and making sure that, you know, they're supported to get to that level where they should be writing these stories and be, you know, where it comes to those characters, absolutely should be providing that voice as well. I think Marvel have obviously done a great job in terms of how that representation is on screen. But wouldn't it have been great to say it was also a deaf writer?
That's the thing. And like, I think there's this expectation as well. Like, we have touched on it before, that often like the actor or actress will become like a consultant as well. And it's happened with me, like in work that I've done before, where I've been talent and you're also talent and also kind of, I guess, not co-directing to that degree, but kind of providing, you know, further information rather than just being able to go in and do your job as talent. You're sort of also required to do some behind the scenes work. Whereas I guess what you're saying is, why is it so difficult for you know, casting to have, I guess, inclusive casting as well as inclusion behind the scenes? Like, do both and it will be even better.
To both. And I think that's exactly it. And I do think that it's so important because, you know, it shouldn't be the talent's job actually to have to consult for themselves, because that puts people in a really difficult position. It also, you know, puts them in a position where they're having to think about access, you know, depending on what the physical disability is, you know, toilets, ramps, for someone who has no sight, like being able to read a script is, you know, there's so many different things that need to be thought through. And then if you have people in the room from early on who actually can contribute and provide those answers, then you get those things right from the start. And no actor should have to be advocating and saying this is wrong when they're actually there to do a job, which is to be that character on screen.
Did we think there was anything that was like possibly negative about the representation? I can't really think of anything from the top of my head. Steph, you're usually the more critical mind of the two of us.
Do you know the one thing? It was interesting because my dad has a hearing aid, and so we were talking about hearing aids, and he did say to me, because he yells about it all the time, and he often doesn't wear it because he has problems or whatever. And I will say the hearing aids seem to work really well compared to other people I know. So I know it squeaked a bit when he put it in initially, but my experience is, especially when he's dealing with all those explosions and fights and like whatever brand he's using, I think we need to get onto that.
I honestly, I can't really think of any criticisms. I actually have another example of something I actually really loved. And there was a small moment in, I think, episode 4, where Clint is watching Haley Steinfeld's character, who is, what's her name, Kate, watching her through a window, keeping an eye out for Maya to arrive, keeping her safe. And he's like, wait, Kate, you got to get out of there now. She's like, why? He's like, that light that's flashing is a silent alarm for people who can't hear alarms. You have to get out now. I was like, even that for me, I was like, that's great, because some people don't think about that. Like, if you can't hear an alarm, then, you know, how does that work? So again, just sort of throwing that bit of extra information in there to give more of a hint as to a different experience to that of what we typically are aware of,
Definitely. It was like a little educational piece.
while being super entertaining.
Yeah.
But how much does that add to the story? And that can only come from having people in the room in terms of that creation who actually know that. And I think it adds so much value to the story when you actually have people who can contribute those bits that people who aren't deaf wouldn't know. Like, I would never know that. So yes, we get an education, but you only get that because you've got the right people in the room to start with to help.
That's it. Exactly.
Definitely.
Making it much more believable. And if someone does, if that is their personal experience, that we all know that's such an amazing feeling when we see our own experience on screen. Like it just, it's hard to explain that feeling, but yeah,
And
it's
sometimes
pretty
it's the
cool.
really small things like that. Like we've spoken about, I think in like our sixth episode or something, about sex education when he gets to the stairs and he's a wheelchair user and it's like there's no way he's getting into that house. And it's just like sometimes the small things where you're like, I feel seen by this. This is so good. Like, and they're also the small kind of educational bits that I think can be really impactful for non-disabled people to really pick up on and learn from. I think I honestly, before we give our scores, Tracy, I think I just have one other like quick question for you, and I think it's about, you sort of touched on it before when you were explaining why representation and inclusion is important, but it's about allyship for, not like, I guess allyship specifically for people with disability in the industry, and I guess why do you think it's important, or do you have a bit of a call to action for anyone else that's non-disabled in the industry to kind of try and uplift disabled creatives to get opportunities?
You know, I feel like I'm still learning every single day about what I can do better and challenging my own notions. Like most of us know these days about our pronouns, that we share our pronouns so that we are respectful of the people that we're talking to and how we're talking to them. But I think one of the things I've learned is that people with disabilities have different ways that they like to be referred to. Like some people don't want to be referred to as having a disability. They may have, a physical challenge. And so part of my learning has been to understand when I'm working with people how they would like me to refer to them and to, their access issue or their ability. And so, I'm always learning and trying to get it right, and I'm very happy to be called out. Can I say that? And I think more of my peers should be willing to be called out. Like, please be respectful and nice to us because we're learning. But I do think I do think we should be very open to that, because we are going to mess it up if you don't have that experience, you don't have that lived experience, you don't have those people around you. And so you might be working with people who have, someone who's deaf or someone who's blind or someone who's in a wheelchair or is an amputee. They're all very different things. And so sometimes you've got to ask questions, but you have to do that respectfully. And sometimes we're going to get it wrong. And I want to learn. So I want to be called out in a way that enables me to learn, so I get it right and I do better.
Like, I think probably just like two little things is like, one, absolutely, like we are all learning. Like nobody is some like perfect inclusion person advocate thing that is going to get absolutely everything right about every marginalized community or oppressed person. Like, it's, nobody is perfect yet, and I think we all need the room to learn and get better at being more inclusive. And I think that's a really important message for us to share on this series is, we can be quite critical about certain representations and certain portrayals or things that are done or said, whatever. But the main thing, I guess, is that we are trying to educate, and that part of that is creating the room and the space and the forgiveness almost to actually let people then go, okay, cool, next time I'll do better. Because that's the most important part, is that we're just consistently trying to do better, all of us though. And then I love the other point about like, yes, not everybody like has the same language that they like to use around their own experience, no matter what experience it is, disability, sexuality, like, gender expression, whatever it is, like gender identity. It's, everybody has different language. There's a big difference between disabled person and person with disability, but I think the main thing really is that you actually either ask or listen to how somebody is actually speaking about themselves and then adopt that same language. So thanks for raising those points. I love that. Now, are we ready to give our scores out of 5 on the inclusive disability representation scale for Hawkeye? Steph, did you want to kick us off?
Sure. Okay. Well, I think given that I didn't really have any criticisms from my perspective, and I love last week when we spoke to Carson Chula, that when he gave his score, he said, in the context of where we are in our journey, this for me was 5 out of 5 representation. I think, it was incidental representation, that her disability or her deafness was not the point of the story. And it was authentic. She actually was able to bring that personal experience to the role. So, yeah, 5 out of 5 for me.
Amazing. And Tracy?
Look, I'm going to go 5 out of 5 for what was on screen, and I'm going to go 4 or maybe 3.5 out of 5 in terms of the creative process. But I will caveat that with I don't know everything. I wasn't there. So I would love to know more about how that worked in the room. Did they even try to get a deaf writer? And if they did, great. And if they haven't been able to find one, what are they doing about that going forward? So that they're about to do a series with Echo. So how are they going to do that? So yeah, as I said, we can always do better. So I hope Marvel are doing so too.
I love that. I'm exactly the same. God, we're a little bit boring this week, but it was such a strong and positive and just fun representation of disability. There was multiple disabled characters. They cast inclusively mostly. And I just thought it was just a really great incidental representation that I think will hopefully continue to break down barriers. And the fact that it's, Echo is already sort of being hailed as having their own series is amazing. And Tracy, I think you're on the money. It'll be about what happens from here. What I think as well is maybe a bit more transparency is needed as well throughout these processes. Because if we've looked up and if we've researched, but we can't find if there was a deaf writer, perhaps that's something that the whole industry needs to look at too. So I think that's interesting. But I was also a 5 out of 5. So I think that's a perfect 5 out of 5 across the board. I don't think we've ever had that. I think we need to have a little celebratory wine or something. Look out.
Sounds good. And the funny thing is, as I said, I couldn't even remember there was disability in it when I first picked it. I was like, I have to go back and watch it again. But it's so interesting, isn't it? But to someone else that's going to have such big value in terms of seeing themselves on screen. So yeah, thank you for letting me be part of this Hawkeye party.
You are so welcome, and thank you for joining us. That is it for this week's episode, everyone. I want to thank you, Steph. I want to thank you, Tracy, and I want to thank everybody who has watched or listened to this episode. We're so grateful for all the support we've been receiving. It's very exciting. We want to hear your thoughts on this week's episode as well as on Hawkeye, and we want to know what your IDR scores are. So you can grab us on email. It's hello@reframedpodcast.com, or jump over to our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you literally just search ReFramed Podcast or Podcast ReFramed, we will show up. You'll be able to find us, jump in our posts, and you'll see Tracy's lovely face in those posts, and you'll be able to just give us your opinions, your scores. We really want to hear what you thought, because it's the whole point of this is to continue the conversation, continue breaking down those barriers, and continue creating opportunities as well in the industry. So my final thing I want to say is a huge thank you to the Community Broadcasting Foundation for helping to fund this series. Without funding, obviously, these amazing conversations can't happen, so we're very grateful. And that's it for this week. We will see you again next week with another wonderful episode of ReFramed. Bye.